So recently I got a request to remake Alphaville's Forever Young, and immediately came to mind was Jay-Z's song Young Forever, so I figured let's remake that one. Tempo for this one is 70 beats per minute, and the track is produced by Kanye West. Now I know this is not an exact replica of Alphaville's Forever Young, but it kind of gets you close to learn some of the sounds that happen in it. So let's start off with that main synth pad. So for that sound, we're going to bring up Logic's Retro Synth. And we're going to start off with a preset here. We'll go over to Synth Strings, and we'll bring in the Bright Strings preset. Let's go and draw in that pattern and then get to some sound design. All right, so that's the pattern. Let's go and take a listen to it as a whole. All right, now let's go ahead and give it that Juno synth flavor. So in Logic's Retro Synth, the first thing that we're gonna do is just bring down the filter here. So we're gonna go just bring it down just ever so slightly here. Let's go and turn on the chorus, and I'm going to pull this up to about 2 o'clock-ish. Pull up the rate a little bit. Now we're starting to get like that Juno type of synth sound. And then we'll focus in on the amp envelope over here. I'm just going to make the attack a little slower. Let's pull back the decay a little bit. Quite a bit, actually. You kind of want the sound to drop out and then start again. I'm going to bring in this filter envelope over here ever so slightly. I'm just going to shape it a little bit better. Just to get a little initial sparkle there. And then to add to that 80s nostalgia, we're going to go ahead and detune the oscillators. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the settings over here. And under voice detuning, I'm going to push this up to about the halfway point at 50. Just gives it more of like a creamy feel. Gives it more of that analog feel. And then in the original track, the spread of the sound was not so wide, so I'm going to make that a little bit more narrow. So under stereo spread, we're going to go ahead and just pull that down to the 50 mark as well. So that's our main synth right there. Next, let's get to the bass. So for that sound, we're creating a new software instrument track. I'm going to bring in Logic's ES2 synthesizer. We will design it from scratch. But before we get to that, let's go ahead and draw on that pattern and then get to that sound design. So for that pattern, I'm just going to copy down the chords over here. I'm just going to take the root note from each chord. All right, and we're going to work with that as a starting point. So it doesn't go on the F here. It is a D minor, so I'm going to bring it down to the D over here. And then what we're going to do here, we're going to give it a little bit of a break right here. I'm going to give it another chop, and I'm going to cut this one in half. That's going to sound like this. All right, so there is the pattern right there. Next, let's go and just pitch this down a couple octaves. So we'll select all of our notes, go Shift, Option, arrow down to bring it down 2 octaves. And for the sound design, we're basically going to create like a Moog bass here. So what we're going to do is leave the oscillators on its default settings here, the sawtooth. We'll go over to mono, turn on unison, pull up the voices to 16. And now we want to detune that sound to give us that sort of 80s nostalgia. So over on our analog knob over here, I'm going to pull it up and take a listen to what happens as we pull this knob up. Now you get that Moog bass. All right, the only thing I want to do here is pull up the cutoff ever so slightly. And over on our amp envelope, I'm just going to soften up the attack. All right, and with the strings here, the pad. All right, next, let's get to that kick that layers with that bass. So for that sound, we'll create a new software instrument track. And we're going to bring in the plugin or Logic's drum synth right over here. We'll design the sound from scratch. We're going to use the default setting that loads up. For the pattern, we're going to go ahead and copy down the same pattern as the bass. So it's like a tonal kick, but that's a little too low. I'm going to pitch it up 1 octave. And in this plugin, you can work with either key tracking on or off. So if it's off, it's just going to play a constant pitch, but key tracking will follow the pitch that we put in. All right, now we'll go ahead and shape the kick to the shape that we need it to be in. So what we're going to do here is just pull down the shape itself. So you see as you pull it up, it's going to give you more of that initial top hit or attack. I'm going to pull down the sweep. The more it's up, the more punchy the kick is. Bring it to the 50 point. And I don't need that bass to ring out so long, so I'm going to bring down the decay. All right, and with this, it's sounding good, but we need to like dirty up that kick a little bit. So what I'm going to do here is go Control Command P, bring in Logic's Fat Effects. I'm going to turn off this module here. I'm going to turn off the bass enhancer. We'll leave the compressor on, but we're going to go over to the distortion module and turn down this, and we're going to change this one over to down sampler. We're going to give it a little bit of dirt here, a little bit of ring to it. And now everything together so far. right, next we're gonna go ahead and design that snare from scratch. Now Kanye West in that era liked to use this type of snare a lot. It's like a white noise snare, and we're gonna create it from scratch. We'll create a new software instrument track. Go Control Command P, bring in Logic's ES2 synthesizer. For this one, we're gonna bring our mixing triangle over here down to oscillator 3. We're not using oscillator 1 or 2. And we're going to change our oscillator over to noise. Let's go ahead and just draw in that pattern. It's just going to be happen on the 2 and the 4 over here. All right, then we're going to just pull up the resonance a bit. Give a little bit of attack to it. I'm going to pull up the drive. All right, so that's the foundation to that snare. And then what we're going to do is just open up an EQ. I'm going to take a little bit of the top end out here. A little bit more. And then we're going to bring in an expander just to give it a little bit more punch here. All right, and then we're going to go to the preset more punch. All right, now let's go ahead and bring the rest of the drums in. It's basically just 2 hats. So here are the 2 sounds right here. I'm just going to bring it into a drum machine designer. Let's go ahead and start off with that main hi-hat. That's basically just a 32 note repeat. So I'm going to change my quantize over here to 30-second notes. I'm going just to brush in that right there. All right, I'm just going to brush in 4 for now, because what it's going to be is this one's going to be at a higher velocity. And then this last one is going to be at a softer velocity. So it's going to be a little bit more quiet than the other. And it's going to give you a little bit of a ride to the hi-hat pattern. So if I go ahead and repeat that. So see how it kind of just goes up and down. If these were hitting harder like the other ones, it'll be a little bit too static. So we're gonna go ahead and take that back out, and we'll just duplicate this over the 4 bars. And then we'll go ahead and bring in that second one. So that is the main beat, and then we got to work on that vocal synth that happens in this one. Now that one I worked really hard on to try and really duplicate or replicate that sound, but I came to realize that it wasn't an actual preset from the PPG wave that was used in the original track in Alphaville's Forever Young. So what they did on that track is what I believe was done was they recorded in a new wavetable into the PPG wave, or put in a new wavetable into the PPG wave, and that's the sound that they worked with. So I couldn't recreate it in Logic Pros, but in case you want to try it for yourself, in Logic, if you go over to the Retro Synth, turn it over to a table mode over here. This is basically a replica of the PPG wave that was used on this track and was used quite frequently on a lot of 80s tracks. So what I did was just go through all these wavetables over here, or at least the vocal ones, to try and match the sound that was in the original track. I couldn't really get one close enough, so I'm just going to do what Kanye did and just sample from the original track. So for that, what I'm going to do is bring in that song first and foremost. But before I do that, I'm going to go to File, I'm going to go to Project Settings, go to Smart Tempo, and I'm going to go Set Imported Files to on-align bars and beats. So now when I bring in that sample, it's going to automatically detect the tempo and make it really easy for us to chop it up. So here is the sample right over here, Alphaville's Forever Young. Logic will analyze it, do its thing. All right, for whatever reason, the tempo is stretched to double time. So what I'm going to do is just divide that in 2 so we get the actual tempo properly. So for the section that we need, we're going to go back over to bar 6, and it's going to be around here-ish. All right, so this right here. All All right, actually, it's going to start right here. To this one right over here. All right, so that's our sample that we need, just that little clip right there. So what we're going to do is just duplicate this track. I'm going to copy it down, and then we'll work on the placement of that sample. So if we go back into our track over here, I'm just going to duplicate this. It happens at the end of every 4 bars. So let's bring this up, and it's just basically going to go right over here. All right, so we'll play this out. Let's unsolo that, take out the track. All right, we barely heard that, so let's just bring that up in volume here. I'm just going to bring that out a little bit more here. If we bring it out a little bit more. All right, so let's take that section out. All right, so that's the section that we need, but we got to just manipulate it so it sounds like the one in the original track. So the first thing that we'll do, we'll just take out some of those clicks and pops. So over on our inspector tab over here, I'm just going to create a fade in of 5 and a fade out of, let's call it 200, a little bit longer. So it kind of comes in and fades out a little bit better. And then I'm going to open up an EQ and just shape this sample. All right, we just want to focus on like this mid vocal synthy part. And then we're going to work with a second EQ to make it a little bit brighter. So we'll bring in Logic's channel EQ. All right, so I'm going to take my shelf over here, make it brighter. So I really want to make this a lot brighter, so don't be scared to push that gain on some frequencies if you need to. All right, I'm going to push a little bit higher here as well. See how dull it is? Now it's a little bit brighter like the one in the original track. And then we're going to clean it up a little bit with some multi-band compression. So we'll go to Logic's multipressor. I'm going to go to a preset that I like to use. It just cleans up sounds. It's a nice preset. I like to use it. It's the Punchy Drums preset. It just kind of cleans it up a little bit with some compression at the different stages here. I'm just using the default setting that loads up. And then I'm going to bring in a delay. We'll use Logic's Echo. And we're just going to use an 1/8 note delay. I'm just going to let it ring out a bit. I'm just going to pull up the wetness a bit. All right, and it sounds like this in context. So that right there is Jay-Z's Young Forever featuring Mr. Hudson. I'm going to go ahead and mix it, arrange it, and when we come back, we'll take a listen to how everything sounds together. that right there is Young Forever by Jay-Z featuring Mr. Hudson, remade in Logic Pro. If you're Logic Pro users out there, I'm going to go ahead and save this entire session for you. Place it as a downloadable link below this video. If you don't use Logic, I got your back as well. You're going to export MIDI stems, audio stems, and of course include the drum kit that you heard in this remake. You can find that entire playback down below the like button as well. If you have any questions on this or just want to chat or have any suggestions for future videos, let's chat down below. Thanks for watching. We'll catch you on the next one. Later. Peace.